Welcome back, boss lady.
What did you just call me?
Boss lady, it's good to see you home.
There's been a mistake. I'm not his wife anymore. I signed the papers myself. Someone needs to correct this.
Kamsi's hand froze on the door handle of the black SUV, sunlight cutting sharp across the courtyard of the estate she swore she'd never see again. Two men in dark suits straightened the second they saw her, and one of them, tall, scarred along the jaw, a man she remembered pointing a gun at her a year ago, bowed his head low and said the words that stopped her heart cold. "Welcome back, boss lady." Kamsi's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She hadn't been called that in over a year. Not since the divorce papers. Not since she packed one suitcase and left Bong standing in that hallway without looking back. Behind the guard, 3 more men lined up along the entrance, each one bowing the exact same way, murmuring the exact same 2 words, like a chant she wasn't prepared for. Boss lady. Her stomach turned. Something was wrong. Someone should have corrected them by now. Someone should have said, "No, she's not. Not anymore." But nobody did. And that silence terrified her more than anything Bong had ever done. If you're already feeling that chill, that's exactly where I need you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching this from, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't see coming. And if you love a slow burn with teeth, hit that subscribe button before we go one step further, because you do not want to miss where this goes. 3 days earlier, Kamsi had been folding laundry in a cramped Atlanta apartment, 3,000 miles and 1 lifetime away from Seoul, when a single phone call unraveled everything she thought she'd buried. The phone had rung 4 times before Kamsi even looked at it, sudsy dishwater dripping from her fingers onto the cracked linoleum floor. She almost let it go to voicemail. She almost let the entire truth of her past stay buried in that little device forever. But something, call it instinct, call it the ghost of a marriage she never fully closed, made her wipe her hands and answer, "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice she hadn't heard in over a year, low and formal, careful in the way only people trained to be careful ever sounded. "Mrs. Kamsi, this is Detective On. I worked security detail for your husband." "Ex-husband," she corrected immediately, her spine straightening as if Bong himself had walked into the room. "What is this about?" "There's been an incident," On said. "Mr. Bong has been hospitalized. He is asking for you." Kamsi laughed. Actually laughed, short and disbelieving, the kind of laugh that comes out when your body doesn't know whether to cry instead. "He's asking for me? After everything? After I signed those papers with his lawyers standing over my shoulder, like I was a criminal being processed?" "Ma'am, I understand your hesitation, but there are things about the divorce you were never told." Her stomach dropped. "What things?" "I can't discuss it over the phone. But if you don't come, I don't think you'll forgive yourself." She stood there for a long moment, water still dripping off her elbow, her heart hammering a rhythm she hadn't felt in over a year. Not since the last night she'd stood in that marble hallway of Bong's estate, watching him sign away a marriage he never once fought for. She had told herself she was over it. She had told her sister she was over it. She had told her own reflection in the mirror, more times than she could count, that leaving Bong was the smartest decision she'd ever made. So why did her hands shake now? "Fine," she whispered. "I'll come. But I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing this to finally get answers." Little did she know, the answers waiting for her in Seoul would break her wide open in ways she never saw coming. If you're the type who needs closure too, who's ever needed to know the real reason behind a goodbye, comment closure below, because trust me, Kamsi's search for hers is about to get a lot messier before it gets any clearer. The flight to Incheon felt longer than the 12 hours it actually was. Kamsi spent most of it staring out the window, replaying the last months of her marriage on a loop she couldn't shut off. She remembered the night everything changed, not with shouting, not with violence, but with a folder. A single manila folder Bong had left carelessly on his desk, thick with photographs and financial records that painted him as someone far darker than the quiet, guarded man she'd fallen in love with. She remembered confronting him, voice shaking, heart splitting in half. "Tell me these aren't what I think they are." Bong hadn't denied it. He hadn't explained it either. He'd simply looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes and said 4 words that ended everything. You should leave, Kamsi. Not, let me explain. Not, it's not what it looks like. Just permission to go, delivered so coldly it felt like a door slamming rather than an opening. She had left 3 days later. No fight, no plea for her to stay. His mother hadn't even looked at her during the final meeting with the lawyers, and Bong himself had signed the papers without a single word, without a single glance in her direction, like she was a stranger being processed out of a building she never should have entered. So why, a year later, was his security detail calling her back like she still belonged there? The SUV that picked her up from Incheon didn't head toward the hospital. "Excuse me," Kamsi said sharply, leaning forward toward the driver. "The hospital is the other direction." The driver's eyes flicked to hers in the rearview mirror, apologetic but unmoving. "Mr. On's orders, ma'am. We're to bring you to the estate first." "For what?" He didn't say. Kamsi's pulse spiked. Something about the driver's tone, too rehearsed, too careful, told her this wasn't a simple miscommunication. This was intentional, and by the time the estate gates rolled into view, ivy-covered stone walls she once called home, her hands were trembling so badly she had to press them flat against her thighs just to steady herself. But nothing could have steadied her for what happened next. The moment her heels touched the courtyard stone, the guards lined up like she was royalty returning from exile. Every single one of them bowed. Every single one of them said the same impossible words. "Welcome back, boss lady." Kamsi's mind scrambled for an explanation. A mistake. A miscommunication. Maybe they hadn't been told about the divorce. But then On himself stepped out from the front doors, and the look on his face wasn't confusion. It was pity. "Detective On," Kamsi said, voice tight. "Why is everyone calling me that? I'm not his wife anymore. I signed the papers myself." On's jaw tightened. He glanced over his shoulder, as if making sure no one else was in earshot, then stepped closer, lowering his voice to something barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Kamsi, the papers you signed were never filed." The world tilted beneath her feet. "What did you just say?" "The divorce was never finalized. Legally, in the eyes of this family, this country, and every guard standing in this courtyard, you have been his wife this entire time." Kamsi's ears started ringing. A year, a whole year of grieving a marriage, of rebuilding a life alone in Atlanta, of telling herself she was divorced, and it had all been a lie? Why would he do that? She whispered, more to herself than to On. "Why would he let me believe?" "That's not even the part that's going to break you," On said quietly, regret thick in his voice. "There's something else, something about why he pushed you away that night. And ma'am, once you hear it, I don't think you're ever going to see him the same way again." Kamsi opened her mouth to demand answers right there in the courtyard, but before On could say another word, the front doors of the estate swung open behind him, and the person standing in the doorway was not Bong. It was his mother, the same woman who hadn't looked at Kamsi once during the divorce meeting. And this time, her expression wasn't cold, it was terrified. If your jaw just dropped like mine did writing this, don't go anywhere. Hit that subscribe button right now, because whatever's coming through that door next is about to flip everything you thought you knew about this story on its head. Bong's mother, Madam Song, stood in the doorway wearing black from head to toe, her usually rigid posture bent slightly, like something heavy had been pressing down on her for days. Kamsi had never once seen this woman look anything but composed, anything but ice. Now her hands trembled around the doorframe, and her eyes, the same sharp eyes that once looked at Kamsi like she was an unwelcome stain on the family name, were rimmed red. "You came," Madam Song said, her voice hoarse. "I told On you wouldn't." "I almost didn't," Kamsi admitted, still reeling from what she'd just learned. "Someone want to explain to me why I've apparently been married this entire time, why nobody bothered to tell me the papers were never filed?" Madam Song's face crumpled for half a second. Just half a second, before the mask slid back into place. "Come inside. This isn't a conversation for the courtyard." Kamsi hesitated. Every instinct in her body told her to turn around, get back in the SUV, and fly straight back to Atlanta, before this family swallowed her whole again. But the desperate look in Madam Song's eyes, the bowing guards, the words "boss lady," still echoing in her skull, she needed to know. She needed the truth, even if it gutted her. She followed Madam Song inside, The estate looked exactly the way she remembered it. Marble floors that echoed every footstep, portraits of stern ancestors lining the walls, the faint smell of sandalwood incense that always seemed to hang in the air. But something felt different now, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. They walked in silence until they reached the study, the same study where Kamsi had once found that fateful folder that shattered her marriage. Madame Song closed the door behind them and finally spoke. "A year ago, my son didn't ask you to leave because he stopped loving you." Kamsi's chest tightened. Then why? Because 2 days before that folder appeared on his desk, a rival syndicate, the Choi family, sent him a message, a photograph of you, taken outside your workplace. Underneath it, a single sentence, "Touch our shipment routes again," and she disappears. The room went silent except for the sound of Kamsi's own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "They threatened me. They threatened you the way they threaten everyone who gets close to my son, as a warning, as leverage." Bong panicked. He didn't know how to protect you and stay married to you at the same time, not with a target already on your back. So he did something reckless. He staged distance. He let you find files that made him look like a monster, hoping you'd hate him enough to run far away and never look back. Kamsi felt her knees weaken, and she gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "That's insane. That's absolutely insane. He destroyed us to protect me. He thought if the Choi family believed you meant nothing to him anymore, they would lose interest in you. And it worked. For a while. You disappeared into your life in America. Nobody touched you." Madame Song's voice cracked slightly. But he never filed the divorce. He told the lawyers to draft everything, to make it look real for the meeting, but he never once submitted it to the courts. Legally, you were always his wife. Emotionally, she paused, swallowing hard. He never let you go for a single day. Kamsi's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. A year of grief. A year of forcing herself to move on from a man she thought discarded her like garbage. And it had all been an elaborate, devastating act of love disguised as cruelty. "Why is everyone acting like I need to know this right now?" Kamsi finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to him? Why is he in the hospital?" Madame Song's face went pale, in a way that made Kamsi's stomach drop straight through the floor. The Choi family found out the divorce was never filed. If you thought that twist was heavy, buckle up, because I promise you, it only gets heavier from here. Drop a in the comments if you're just as shook as Kamsi right now, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because I need you here for what's coming next. "They found out 3 weeks ago," Madame Song continued, each word heavier than the last. "They realized my son had been protecting a wife he never truly let go of, which meant their leverage never actually disappeared. It just went dormant. So they decided to remind him it still existed. What did they do?" Kamsi's voice shook. "They ambushed his convoy 2 nights ago. 6 of our men were injured. My son took a bullet meant for his driver." Madame Song's composure finally cracked completely, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. "He is alive. Barely. He has been asking for you since the moment he woke up in that hospital bed, and I refused to call you at first, because I was terrified of dragging you back into this world. But he won't stop asking, Kamsi. He won't eat. He won't rest. He keeps saying your name like it's the only thing keeping him tethered here." Kamsi's entire body went numb. Everything she thought she knew, her tidy narrative of a cold, cruel man who threw her away without a second thought, had just been demolished in the span of 10 minutes. The pain she carried for an entire year, the nights she cried herself to sleep convincing herself she meant nothing to him, all of it had been built on a lie he told to keep her alive. And now he was lying in a hospital bed, possibly dying, and the guards outside were bowing to her like she'd never left at all. "Take me to him," Kamsi said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Right now." But Madame Song didn't move. Instead, she reached into the drawer of the desk and pulled out a folder, an eerily familiar folder, thinner than the one from before, but just as damning in its own way. "Before you see him," Madame Song said quietly, "there's one more thing you need to know. Something even An doesn't know. Something only I know, because I'm the one who insisted on it." Kamsi's hands curled into fists at her sides. "What now?" "The night you found those files and left. The night you believed my son destroyed your marriage on purpose. You weren't the only one who left something behind. Kamsi's breath caught somewhere in her throat, dread pooling low in her stomach like cold water. What are you talking about? Madame Song opened the folder and slid a single piece of paper across the desk. Kamsi looked down, and the moment her eyes landed on the document, the entire room seemed to spin around her. It was a medical record, dated 14 months ago, 1 week before she left Seoul. Her name was on it. And so was a single devastating word she never expected to see typed in cold, clinical print: pregnant. If you need a second to process that like I did, comment "wait what" right now. Because trust me, you are not ready for what Kamsi discovers next. And if you're loving this roller coaster so far, smash that subscribe button, because we are far from finished. Kamsi stared at the paper until the letters blurred together, her ears ringing so loud she almost missed Madame Song speaking again. You didn't know, Madame Song said gently, watching Kamsi's face carefully. I could tell by your reaction, which means you left Seoul without ever finding out. That's not possible, Kamsi whispered, shaking her head, backing away from the desk like the paper itself might bite her. I would have known. I would have felt it. I would have... Her voice cracked. Where is my child? Where is... Sit down, Madame Song said quickly, moving around the desk toward her. Kamsi, sit down before you fall. Kamsi didn't sit. She couldn't. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. Tell me right now, is my baby alive? Madame Song's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was something else beneath the sorrow, something that looked almost like tenderness. She is alive, she is safe. She is 6 months old, sleeping right now in the east wing of this house, cared for by a nurse I trust with my own life. The room tilted violently. Kamsi grabbed the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. 6 months old. That means... Her mind raced through the timeline, the arithmetic of grief and betrayal, and everything she thought she understood about the last year of her life, crumbling apart at the seams. I was already pregnant when I left. I didn't even know. You collapsed at the airport before your flight, Madame Song said quietly. Do you remember that? Kamsi's mind flashed back, a hazy memory she'd buried under a year of forced composure. She'd chalked the fainting spell up to stress, to heartbreak, to the emotional wreckage of walking away from her marriage. She never once considered, I had you brought back here instead of letting you board that flight, Madame Song continued. Bong didn't know. I made that decision alone, and I have carried the weight of it every day since. The doctors confirmed the pregnancy that same night. You were unconscious for almost 6 hours. Then why? Kamsi's voice broke completely now, tears streaming freely down her face. Why does he think I left with nothing? Why did nobody tell me? Why did nobody tell him? Madame Song's composure finally shattered entirely, tears spilling over as she confessed the truth she'd clearly been carrying like a stone in her chest for months. Because I was afraid. If Bong knew you were pregnant, he never would have let you leave, and the Choi family would have used the baby as leverage instead of just you. I told the hospital staff to keep it quiet. I told you, once you woke up groggy and disoriented, that you'd simply fainted from exhaustion. I let you board a later flight, still believing you were leaving with nothing but a broken heart, because I thought, I truly believed, that was the only way to keep my granddaughter safe. Kamsi felt something inside her crack wide open. Rage, grief, love, betrayal, all tangled together into something she had no name for. You stole a year of my daughter's life from me. I know, Madame Song whispered, and I will spend the rest of mine trying to make it right, starting today, starting with taking you to her. And to him, if you're crying right now, comment, Kamsi's about to walk into a room and meet the daughter she never knew existed, and I promise you, what happens next is going to wreck you even more. And hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the story, hit that subscribe button, because we still have a long way to go. The nursery was quiet, bathed in soft afternoon light filtering through gauzy curtains, and the moment Kamsi stepped inside, every ounce of anger in her chest dissolved into something raw and overwhelming. A nurse rose from a rocking chair near the crib, bowing respectfully before quietly slipping out of the room, leaving Kamsi alone, with a truth she couldn't have prepared for, even if she'd had a lifetime to try. The baby stirred in her crib, tiny fists curling near her face, dark curls framing a face that was unmistakably, Undeniably, a blend of two people who had loved each other fiercely, even while tearing each other apart. She has his eyes, Kamsi whispered, tears falling freely now, as she leaned over the crib. God, she has his exact eyes. Her name is Ariam, Madame Song said softly from the doorway. It means beautiful. Bong chose it before he ever laid eyes on her, back when he still believed you would return to Seoul on your own one day, and he could tell you the truth himself. Kamsi reached into the crib with trembling hands, lifting her daughter for the first time, and the second Ariam's tiny body settled against her chest. Something in Kamsi rearranged itself permanently. A year of grief, of anger, of convincing herself she was better off without this family. All of it collided with a love so instant and consuming it nearly knocked the breath out of her. I need to see him, Kamsi said, voice thick with emotion, eyes never leaving her daughter's face. I need to see Bong right now. Madame Song nodded, but something in her expression made Kamsi's stomach twist with unease. There's a car waiting. But Kamsi. She hesitated, choosing her next words with visible difficulty. The doctors aren't certain he'll wake up again. He's been slipping in and out of consciousness since the surgery. The bullet damaged more than they initially realized. Kamsi's arms tightened protectively around Ariam. Then we're wasting time standing here talking. The drive to the hospital felt like the longest 20 minutes of Kamsi's life. Ariam bundled against her chest the entire way, guards flanking the SUV front and back like an armored procession. She barely registered the hospital hallways as they moved through them, barely registered the way nurses and doctors stepped aside, bowing slightly, whispering "boss lady" under their breath as she passed. All she could think about was Bong's face. The way he'd looked at her the night everything fell apart, cold and distant, hiding an entire truth behind eyes that gave nothing away. She'd spent a year hating him for that coldness. Now she understood it had been the deepest act of love she'd ever witnessed. Reckless, misguided, but love all the same. When she finally stepped into his hospital room, the sight nearly buckled her knees. Bong lay motionless against stark white sheets, tubes and monitors surrounding him, his usually commanding presence reduced to something fragile and human in a way she'd never seen before. A bandage wrapped tightly around his torso, dark bruising visible along his jaw, his skin pale beneath the fluorescent lighting. Bong, she whispered, moving closer. Ariam still cradled against her chest. Bong, I'm here. Nothing. No response. Just the steady, mechanical beep of the heart monitor filling the silence between them. She sat beside his bed, gently placing Ariam against his side, pressing her daughter's tiny hand against his still fingers. Look, she whispered through tears. She has your eyes. You have a daughter, Bong. She's beautiful, and she's healthy, and she needs her father to wake up. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then his fingers twitched. If your heart just skipped a beat like mine did, comment he's waking up, right now. Because I promise you, what happens in the next 60 seconds is going to change absolutely everything. And if you've made it this far without subscribing, now's the time, because trust me, you do not want to miss this. Bong's eyes fluttered open slowly, disoriented at first, unfocused, until they landed on Kamsi's face hovering above him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out except a broken, disbelieving exhale. You came back, he finally rasped, voice raw from disuse. I had to, Kamsi whispered, tears streaming down her face. I had a lot of questions, and apparently, a daughter I never knew existed. Bong's eyes dropped to the tiny bundle resting against his side, and something in his expression shattered completely. Relief, disbelief, love, and grief, all crashing together at once. Ariam, he breathed, lifting a shaking hand to touch her small fingers. You're really here. She's been here the whole time, Kamsi said softly. I just didn't know. Bong's gaze lifted back to Kamsi, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw him without any walls up at all. Raw, exposed, terrified. I have so much to explain, so much I need to tell you, about the Choi family, about the divorce, about why I pushed you away. I already know, Kamsi interrupted gently. Your mother told me everything. Something in Bong's face relaxed slightly, only for it to tense again seconds later, his grip on Ariam's tiny hand tightening. Then you know it isn't over. The Choi family isn't going to stop just because I survived. If anything, this makes it worse. They know about the marriage now. They'll assume they know about. His eyes flicked to Ariam, panic flooding his features. They can't know about her, Kamsi. If they find out I have a daughter, everything changes. Kamsi's blood ran cold. What are you saying? Before Bong could answer, the door to the hospital room burst open, and An rushed in, face pale, breathless, phone clutched tightly in his hand. Sir, An said urgently, eyes flicking nervously toward Kamsi and the baby before landing back on Bong. We have a problem. A big one. What happened? Bong demanded, attempting to sit up despite his injuries, wincing sharply as Kamsi gently pressed him back down. An hesitated, glancing at Kamsi again, like he wasn't sure she should hear what came next, but the urgency in his eyes won out. Security footage from the estate just came in. Someone breached the perimeter 40 minutes ago. Whoever it was didn't head toward the main house. Then where did they go? Bong's voice was sharp now, dangerous. Every trace of vulnerability replaced instantly by cold calculation. An's gaze flicked one final time toward the baby sleeping peacefully against Bong's side, and his next words dropped like a bomb into the middle of the room. They went straight to the nursery. If you thought you could breathe for even a second, think again. Drop a in the comments right now if that twist just gutted you. And if you're loving every second of this, hit subscribe, because trust me, this story is about to hit its most intense turn yet. Kamsi's blood turned to ice. The nursery? But she's right here. Ariam is right here with us. An's face didn't relax. If anything, it grew tighter, more grim. That's exactly why this doesn't make sense. Whoever breached the perimeter knew exactly where the nursery was located. They knew the layout of a wing most of our own men don't have clearance to enter. This wasn't a random intrusion, sir. This was someone with inside knowledge. Bong's jaw clenched so hard, Kamsi could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. Someone on the inside. I've already pulled every guard rotation from the last month, An said. I'll have a list of everyone who had access to that wing within the hour. Do it now, Bong ordered, his voice regaining some of the authority Kamsi remembered from before everything fell apart. And triple security around this room. Nobody gets near my daughter. Nobody gets near my daughter. An nodded sharply and disappeared out the door, leaving a thick, suffocating silence behind him. Kamsi looked down at Ariam, still sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware that she'd just become the center of a war she hadn't even lived long enough to understand. Bong, Kamsi said quietly, her voice trembling. What exactly are we walking into here? Bong reached for her hand, his grip weak but urgent. Kamsi, listen to me. The Choi family has been trying to dismantle everything my father built for over a decade. They tried buying us out. They tried framing us with the police. When none of that worked, they escalated to violence. The ambush 2 nights ago wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to send a message. Show me they could reach me anytime, anywhere, no matter how many guards surrounded me. And now they know about her, Kamsi whispered, glancing down at Ariam. If today's breach was them, Bong said grimly, then yes. And if they know about her, they'll see her as the ultimate leverage. Not just against me, against this entire family's future. Kamsi's protective instincts roared to life, in a way she'd never experienced before, something fierce and unshakable settling deep in her chest. Then we don't give them the chance. Bong studied her for a long moment, something like awe flickering behind the exhaustion in his eyes. A year apart, and you still fight like you never left. I didn't leave because I was weak, Kamsi said firmly. I left because I thought I had no reason to stay. Turns out I had every reason. I just didn't know it yet. Before Bong could respond, An burst back through the door, this time with something clutched tightly in his gloved hand, a small object wrapped in a plastic evidence bag. We found this in the nursery, An said grimly, holding it up. Left on the edge of the crib. Whoever broke in wasn't there to take anything. Kamsi squinted at the object, and her stomach dropped straight to the floor. It was a photograph of Ariam, taken through the nursery window sometime in the last 24 hours, before Kamsi had even arrived in Seoul. Someone had been watching her daughter long before today's breach. If your stomach just dropped like mine did, comment, not the baby, right now, because I promise you, the truth behind that photograph is about to blow this entire story wide open. And if you're still here, still hooked, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started. Bong's face went ashen as he stared at the photograph, and for the first time since Kamsi had walked into that hospital room, she saw genuine fear flash across his features, not for himself, but for their daughter. "Turn it over," he said quietly. An hesitated, then flipped the evidence bag, revealing handwriting scrawled across the back of the photograph in sharp, deliberate strokes. Kamsi leaned closer, and the words on the back sent a chill straight through her spine. "She has her mother's smile. It would be a shame if she never got the chance to use it." "That's not a threat," Bong said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's a promise." "Who would do this?" Kamsi demanded, clutching Ariam tighter against her chest. "Who hates you enough to threaten a baby?" An and Bong exchanged a look Kamsi couldn't quite read. Something heavy. Something loaded with history she wasn't privy to. "It's not just about hating me," Bong said finally. "The Choi family has been trying to eliminate every branch of my father's bloodline for 15 years. My older brother, my cousin's children. This isn't new territory for them. It's practically tradition." Kamsi's mind reeled. "Your brother? I didn't even know you had a brother." Bong's expression darkened further, old grief resurfacing beneath the current crisis. "I don't. Not anymore. He died when I was 19. Car accident, according to the official report. Sabotage, according to everyone who actually knew him." The weight of the family Kamsi had married into settled over her fully for the first time. Not just wealth, not just power, but generations of blood and loss stretching back further than she'd ever imagined. "And you never told me any of this." "I was trying to protect you from it," Bong said, guilt heavy in his voice. "Just like I was trying to protect you a year ago. And look where that got us." "Enough," Kamsi said suddenly, surprising even herself with the steel in her voice. "No more protecting me by keeping me in the dark. That's what led to this in the first place. If we're going to survive whatever's coming, I need to know everything. All of it." Bong studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Respect, maybe, or perhaps the dawning realization that the woman standing before him wasn't the same one who'd walked away a year ago. She'd come back sharper, stronger, unwilling to be shielded from the truth, even when it terrified her. "All right," he said finally, voice steady despite his injuries. "Everything. Starting with the real reason the Choi family wants my bloodline gone." An cleared his throat, glancing nervously toward the door. "Sir, perhaps this isn't the time." "There's no better time," Bong interrupted. "If something happens to me tonight, Kamsi needs to know how to protect our daughter. She needs to know the truth about the shipment records the Choi family is terrified will surface. The ones tied to a senator who still sits in office today. The ones that could bring down half the syndicates operating in this city if they ever became public." Kamsi's breath caught. "Wait, you have evidence that could take down that many people?" "I don't," Bong said. "But my father did. And before he died, he hid it somewhere only one other living person knows how to find." Kamsi's heart pounded, dread and anticipation colliding violently in her chest. "Who?" Bong's eyes lifted to hers, heavy with a truth she wasn't remotely prepared for. "You," he said quietly. "You've had it this entire time. You just don't remember. If you need a minute after that one, take it. But come right back. Drop 'no way' in the comments if you did not see that coming. And if you're still glued to this story, make sure you've hit subscribe, because this is where things are about to get absolutely wild." Kamsi stared at Bong like he'd lost his mind entirely. "That's impossible. I would remember something like that. I would remember hiding evidence that could take down a senator." "Would you?" Bong asked quietly. "Because the night you collapsed at the airport, the same night my mother found out you were pregnant, you weren't just exhausted from stress. You'd been drugged, a slow-acting sedative designed to look like fainting from dehydration. My father suspected someone was trying to get to the evidence through you, months before he died, and he made sure whatever he gave you would stay hidden, even from your own memory, until the right moment." Kamsi's mind spun, grasping for anything solid to hold on to. "What did he give me?" "I don't know," Bong admitted. "He died 2 weeks after you left Seoul, before he could tell me anything beyond a single sentence. She's carrying more than she knows." "I thought he meant Ariam." I didn't understand until just now that he might have meant something else entirely. The hospital room fell into a heavy electric silence. The weight of everything, the pregnancy, the threats, the hidden evidence, the daughter sleeping peacefully in the middle of a war she never asked to be born into, pressing down on all three of them at once. Somewhere down the hallway, a monitor began beeping erratically, followed by the sudden sound of running footsteps and raised voices. On's radio crackled to life against his hip, a panicked voice breaking through the static. "Sir, we have a situation on the East Wing perimeter." Multiple unauthorized vehicles just breached the outer gate. Bong's eyes snapped to Kamsi, sharp and urgent, all traces of vulnerability replaced by pure, focused survival instinct. "They're here," he said. "Get Ariam. We need to move. Now." Kamsi didn't ask questions. She scooped Ariam tighter against her chest and followed Bong's shouted instructions as two guards burst through the door, one already reaching for the wheelchair folded against the wall, the other sweeping the hallway with his weapon raised. "He can't be moved," a doctor protested, rushing in behind them, clipboard clutched to her chest. "His sutures haven't even fully set." "With respect," On said, already pulling the IV stand free. "The people coming through that gate won't care about his sutures." Bong gritted his teeth as two guards lifted him into the wheelchair, pain flashing raw and unfiltered across his face for just a moment before the mask of command slid back into place. "Kamsi, stay directly behind me. Don't stop moving no matter what you hear." "What am I going to hear?" Kamsi asked, but nobody answered her, and somehow that silence was worse than any answer could have been. They moved fast through a service corridor Kamsi didn't even know existed, fluorescent lights blurring overhead, the sound of Ariam's soft fussing the only thing keeping Kamsi tethered to the present, instead of spiraling into pure panic. Somewhere behind them, distant and muffled through concrete, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The unmistakable crack of gunfire, far enough away to still be survivable, close enough to prove this was very, very real. "That's the west stairwell," On said grimly into his radio. "They're trying to flank the main entrance. Get us to the underground garage," Bong ordered. "Now. If your pulse is racing like mine right now, comment run, and let's see how fast this chat moves. Because trust me, Kamsi is about to find out exactly how far this family will go to protect what's left of it. And if you're still here holding your breath with me, hit subscribe, because we are not slowing down." They reached the underground garage in a blur of adrenaline, wincing with every jolt of the wheelchair over uneven concrete, On barking orders into his radio, guards forming a tight, moving wall around Kamsi and the baby like a living shield. A black armored SUV idled near the exit ramp, engine already running, doors thrown open and waiting. "In," On said sharply, and Kamsi didn't argue, climbing into the back seat and pulling Ariam against her chest, as two guards half-lifted Bong in beside her, his jaw clenched tight against a fresh wave of pain. The SUV lurched forward the moment the doors slammed shut, tires screeching against concrete as it wound up the exit ramp and out into the blinding afternoon light of a Seoul street that had no idea what kind of war was unfolding just beneath its surface. "Where are we even going?" Kamsi asked, breathless, one hand cradling Ariam's head, the other gripping Bong's sleeve like an anchor. "Somewhere off the grid," Bong said, breathing hard through the pain. "A property under my mother's maiden name. Nobody outside this car knows it exists, not even half my own men. And the evidence?" Kamsi pressed. "The thing your father hid. You said I have it. How am I supposed to protect something I don't even remember?" Bong's eyes flicked to hers, something unreadable passing behind them. "My father wasn't a subtle man when it mattered least, and he was terrifyingly precise when it mattered most. If he hid something inside your memory, there will be a trigger, a phrase, an object, something designed to surface only under the right conditions. That's not exactly comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting," Bong said. "It was meant to be safe, and right now, safe is the only thing that matters." The safe house turned out to be a modest two-story home, tucked into a quiet residential neighborhood outside the city. Nothing like the marble opulence of the estate. No guards visible from the street, no gates. Nothing to suggest the family sitting inside it was worth more than the entire block combined. Kamsi found something strangely comforting in the ordinariness of it, like for one suspended moment, they could simply be a family instead of a target. That illusion lasted exactly 40 minutes. But wait, Kamsi's own thoughts interrupted the quiet, something nagging at the edge of her memory, the moment she stepped through the front door and caught sight of a small wooden box sitting on the entryway table. Simple, unassuming, carved with a pattern she somehow recognized, despite having never set foot in this house before. I've seen that before. Bong settled carefully onto the living room couch by two guards, went very still. What did you say? That box. Kamsi moved toward it almost against her own will. Ariam still asleep in her arms, her fingers trembling as she reached out and traced the carved pattern along its lid. A lotus flower, intricate and old, worn smooth in places like it had been touched 1,000 times before. I don't understand. I've never been to this house. How do I know this box? That box belonged to my father, Bong said slowly, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. It sat on his desk for 30 years. Nobody outside our immediate family has ever seen it. Kamsi, open it. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid, half expecting nothing, half terrified of exactly what she might find. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, sat a single brass key and a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. If you're leaning forward right now the way I am just writing this, comment, open it, because I promise you, whatever's written on that paper is about to change absolutely everything. And if you haven't smashed that subscribe button yet, now is officially the time, because we are about to hit the biggest twist of this entire story. Kamsi unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, and the moment her eyes landed on the handwriting, something in her chest lurched violently, a memory surfacing so suddenly it nearly knocked the breath out of her. She remembered this handwriting. She remembered sitting across from an old man with kind, tired eyes in a tea house near the estate, months before everything fell apart, listening to him speak in careful, deliberate riddles about legacy and protection and the weight of secrets. She had thought it was simply an old man's rambling at the time. She hadn't understood he was preparing her for exactly this moment. I remember him, Kamsi whispered, tears filling her eyes. Your father. He met with me. Just once. He told me if anything ever happened, I should trust the lotus and nothing else. Bong's breath caught audibly. He met with you. Alone? I never knew that. He asked me not to tell you, Kamsi admitted, the memory sharpening with every passing second, like a photograph slowly developing in her mind. He said it needed to stay between us. He gave me a phrase to remember, something he said would open the right door when the time came. She closed her eyes, reaching for the words that had been buried inside her for over a year. The lotus blooms twice. The moment the words left her mouth, the brass key in her hand grew warm, not literally, but symbolically, like something inside her had finally clicked into place after 14 months of confusion. That's a location, she said suddenly, eyes flying open. A safety deposit box, downtown, near the old textile district. I walked past it every day when I lived here, and never once thought about it. Why would I think about it? I didn't even know I was carrying a secret. Bong stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time all over again. My father chose you specifically because nobody would ever suspect you. A foreign wife, unconnected to syndicate business, completely outside anyone's radar. He hid the most dangerous evidence in this country, inside the one person the Choi family would never think to investigate. Until now, An said grimly from the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, face ashen. Sir, I just got word. The Choi family's lead enforcer was seen near the textile district 2 hours ago. Kamsi's stomach dropped through the floor, for what felt like the 100th time that day. They know. They don't know exactly what they're looking for, Bong said, though his voice carried none of the confidence his words tried to project. But if they're circling that location, it means they're closer to figuring this out than we thought. If you're screaming internally right now, you are not alone. Drop a in the comments, because I promise you, this story is about to escalate in ways you did not see coming. And if you're loving every second of this chaos, make sure you've hit that subscribe button, because trust me, we are just getting into the real twist. Then we move first, Kamsi said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. Before they figure it out completely. Absolutely not, Bong said sharply, struggling to sit up straighter despite the guards trying to keep him still. You are not walking into a district crawling with Choi enforcers, Kamsi. Not with our daughter. Not after everything that's already happened today. Then what exactly is your plan? Kamsi shot back, anger and fear tangling together in her chest. Wait here, while they circle closer and closer, until they figure out what I already know. At least if I move now, I have a head start. She's not wrong, An said quietly, earning a sharp glare from Bong. Sir, with respect, every hour we wait is an hour they get closer. If Kamsi can retrieve the evidence before they narrow down the location, we finally have leverage instead of just being targets. Bong's jaw worked silently for a long moment, torn between the tactical truth of An's words and every protective instinct screaming at him to keep Kamsi and Ariam locked safely behind these walls. Finally, his shoulders sagged, defeat and fear warring behind his eyes. If you're going, he said quietly, you're not going without me. You can barely sit up, Kamsi said gently. I don't care, Bong said, voice cracking with an emotion far bigger than his physical pain. I already let you walk away from me once without fighting for you. I am not doing it again. Not while there's breath left in my body. Kamsi's eyes filled with tears she didn't have time to shed. Instead, she nodded once, handing Ariam carefully to Madame Song, who had appeared silently in the doorway sometime during the argument, her face pale but resolute. Keep her safe, Kamsi said. With my life, Madame Song answered, and for the first time since Kamsi had met this woman, she believed every word of it completely. They moved out 20 minutes later, Bong wincing in the passenger seat despite his protests that he was fine, An driving with white-knuckled focus, Kamsi in the back seat clutching the brass key like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had turned completely upside down in the span of a single afternoon. The textile district buzzed with its usual late-afternoon chaos, vendors calling out prices, fabric bolts stacked in colorful towers along narrow streets, the smell of dye and street food thick in the humid air. Kamsi led them through the crowd with a confidence she didn't fully understand, muscle memory guiding her feet toward a nondescript building tucked between two larger storefronts, the kind of place that had clearly been standing for decades without anyone paying it much attention. This is it, she whispered, staring up at the faded sign above the door. I don't know how I know, but this is it. But wait, here's where it gets crazy. Because the moment they stepped inside, Kamsi immediately spotted something that made her entire body go rigid with fear. Standing at the counter, mid-conversation with the clerk, was a face she recognized instantly, even though she'd only seen it once before, captured in a grainy photograph inside Bong's study a year ago during the darkest week of their marriage. The Choi family's lead enforcer was already here. If your jaw just hit the floor like mine did, comment, they beat them there, right now. Because I promise you, what happens in the next few minutes is the twist you have been waiting this entire story for. And if you're still with me, still hooked, hit that subscribe button immediately, because you do not want to miss a single second of what's coming. Kamsi froze mid-step, her hand instinctively reaching back to grip Bong's sleeve, but before either of them could retreat, An was already moving, positioning himself smoothly between Kamsi and the counter, his hand hovering near the inside of his jacket. Don't react, Bong murmured low against her ear, his voice tight with restrained pain and sharpened focus. If he sees fear on your face, he'll know exactly why we're here. How am I supposed to not react? Kamsi whispered back, heart hammering so hard she was certain the entire shop could hear it. That man threatened our daughter. That man doesn't know what you look like, Bong said. Not yet. You're just a woman standing in a doorway. Keep it that way. The enforcer finished his exchange with the clerk, sliding something across the counter that Kamsi couldn't quite see, before turning toward the exit. For one heart-stopping second, his eyes swept across the shop, passing over Kamsi without a flicker of recognition, before he pushed through the door and disappeared into the crowded street outside. Kamsi exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He didn't recognize me. Not yet, An said grimly, already moving toward the counter. But if he was here asking questions, we don't have much time before he comes back with people who might. The clerk, an elderly man with sharp, knowing eyes, watched their approach with an expression that suggested he'd been expecting exactly this moment for a very long time. You have the key, he said simply, not a question. Kamsi held it up, her hand trembling slightly. I was told to say the lotus blooms twice. The old man's face shifted, decades of guarded caution melting into something like relief. He said someone would come eventually. He didn't say it would take this long. He reached beneath the counter and produced a small ledger, sliding it toward her. Box 214, lower level. You'll need to sign. Campsey's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen, but she signed anyway, muscle memory once again guiding her through motions she didn't consciously remember ever learning. The old man led them down a narrow staircase into a dim basement, lined with rows of numbered deposit boxes, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Box 214 sat near the back, unremarkable among dozens of identical metal doors. Campsey's hand shook as she slid the brass key into the lock, and for one suspended moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath alongside her. The lock clicked open. Comment finally right now if you've been waiting for this moment just as long as I have. Because trust me, what's inside that box is about to change absolutely everything. And if you're not subscribed yet, please, do it now. Because I promise you, the ending of this story is going to leave you speechless. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, sat a slim leather journal and a small black flash drive, both remarkably preserved, despite over a year sitting untouched in the dark. Campsey lifted them out with reverent, trembling hands, passing them immediately to Bong, whose face had gone pale as he flipped through the journal's first few pages. "This is it," he breathed, disbelief and something like grief coloring his voice. Shipment manifests, bank transfers, names, dates, everything my father spent the last 5 years of his life quietly documenting. This isn't just evidence against the Choi family, Campsey. This is evidence against everyone. Politicians, police officials, people who've been protected for decades. "So what happens now?" Campsey asked, though some part of her already dreaded the answer. Bong closed the journal slowly, his eyes lifting to meet hers with a weight that settled heavy and certain between them. "Now, everything changes. The moment this becomes public, every syndicate in this city, every corrupt official named in these pages, they'll all have a reason to make sure it disappears, along with everyone who touched it. Including us," Campsey said quietly. "Including Ariam," Bong said, and the raw fear in his voice was unlike anything Campsey had heard from him yet, sharper and more desperate than even the moment he'd woken up in that hospital bed. "Campsey, I need you to understand something. The second we walk out of this basement, we are no longer just running from the Choi family. We become the single greatest threat to every powerful person in this country who has something to hide." Before Campsey could respond, On's phone buzzed sharply against the silence, and the color drained from his face as he read the message flashing across the screen. "Sir," he said, voice tight with barely restrained panic, "you need to see this." He turned the phone toward them, and Campsey's entire world tilted violently on its axis for what felt like the 100th time that day. It was a live security feed from the safe house. 3 unmarked vehicles were pulling into the quiet residential street where Madame Song and Ariam had been left behind. Supposedly safe, supposedly hidden from a world that clearly already knew exactly where to find them. "That's not possible," Bong said, voice breaking. "Nobody knew that location. Nobody outside this family." He stopped, his eyes lifted slowly to On, a horrible realization dawning across his face in real time. "Nobody outside this family," Bong repeated slowly, "and the people I trust most inside it." On's expression didn't change, didn't flicker with the confusion or panic Campsey expected. Instead, something cold and resigned settled behind his eyes, and in that single unbearable moment, Campsey understood with sickening clarity exactly what that look meant. "On," Bong said, his voice dropping to something dangerously quiet. "Tell me you didn't." "I'm sorry, sir," On said softly, already stepping backward toward the staircase, putting distance between himself and the 2 people he'd sworn his entire life to protect. "You have no idea how sorry I am, but the Choi family made me an offer 8 months ago that I couldn't survive refusing, and now that you have that journal in your hands, they're not going to wait a second longer to make sure it never leaves this basement. If you did not see that coming, comment "not on" right now, because I promise you, this is exactly the kind of gut punch twist I warned you about at the very beginning of this story. And if this just wrecked you as much as it wrecked me writing it, hit that subscribe button immediately, because you are not ready for what happens next. Campsey's blood turned to ice as the basement door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, the distinct metallic click of a lock sliding into place, echoing down into the confined space around them. On was already gone, vanished up a second stairwell Kamsi hadn't even noticed, leaving her and Bong trapped in a windowless room with nothing but a journal that could burn down an empire and a phone screen still showing 3 unmarked vehicles closing in on the one place their daughter was supposed to be safe. Bong, Kamsi whispered, terror clawing up her throat. Ariam. Bong's hands shook as he dialed his mother's number, pressing the phone hard against his ear, his entire body rigid with a fear Kamsi had never once seen on him, not even in that hospital bed, not even facing down his own mortality. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Madame Song finally picked up, and the moment her voice came through, breathless and terrified, Kamsi's entire world narrowed down to a single sentence that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Bong, Madame Song gasped. They're already inside the house. If you're not okay right now, I completely understand, because neither am I, and this is exactly why this story has a part 2, because there is no way I'm ending things here without giving you the ending this deserves. If you want to know whether Kamsi makes it back in time, whether Ariam is safe, and exactly how far An's betrayal really goes, comment part 2 right now, and let me know you need this story to continue. If you've made it this far, please, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you think happens next, because trust me, you have no idea what's coming. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in part 2.